In this video, we're going to talk about collusive arrangements or collusion. It's one possible solution to the oligopoly problem. A small number of players get together and act collusively. And the way we're going to think about this is we're going to think about the tasks that these firms have to take care of, the tasks that these firms have to handle if they're actually going to be able to make any money out of this collusive arrangement. So we'll start by thinking about collusion, and the example I'm going to use is oil, okay? Because it's a collusive arrangement that we observe. Okay, we've observed it happen. OPEC in 1973 had the OPEC oil embargo, and it was basically a classic set of conditions for a cartel. So let's assume that we're back in 1972. Assume that it is a competitive industry. Oil was a pretty competitive industry. Oil was selling pretty cheap, $3 a barrel. Okay, and that's kind of what it cost to get it out of the ground. Okay, it would just kind of come out, $3 a barrel, and that was what the market was. Now, suppose the people in the industry decide, well, you know what? What we like to do is we'd like to actually collude. Right? OPEC had been around for a long time. It actually formed in the 60s, early 60s. It was an organization that formed, it was called OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, but their main concern was to figure out how to get a handle on the Israelis, okay, because that was in the Middle East. The Arab-Israeli conflicts were sort of legendary. And that was what they thought about most of the time until the 70s. They understood their economic muscle. And let's think about that problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to think that we're going to divide these into tasks. And the first task is to think, let's draw the market here. So we have price, and we have quantity, and we've got a demand curve. Actually, to be honest, why don't we be a little bit more accurate? The demand curve for oil was pretty steep. We talked about this when we did elasticity. The demand curve for oil, just like the demand curve for gasoline, basically manufacturing runs on energy, and oil was the world's main source of energy. So you have a supply curve that looks something like this, and the competitive outcome was here, and the competitive price was approximately $3 a barrel. Now, the first thing you have to do when you get together to talk about being a cartel is say, well, what price do we want? What's the price? So we're gonna call task number one, okay? Find the optimal P star, and I'm gonna use this subscript fix because this is typically called price fixing. Okay, it's one of the things you should remember while we're talking about this is that we're using OPEC as an example. OPEC is above the law. Okay, our antitrust laws don't impact them, and so what they did openly. In the United States, if firms try to collude, which they do, there are convictions all the time in courts in the United States for firms who got together in the back room at some bar and had a few hard drinks and some hard discussions and ended up with a new world order, so to speak, for the prices in their industry. Eventually, they get caught and things happen. The interesting thing here is that even though these people had complete freedom to do this, it was tough. Finding the optimal price is not as easy as you would think. Some of the OPEC countries wanted to have a really high price. And some of them said, no, we can't go too high because we'll cripple the world economy and then they'll just stop buying our product. If they shut down all their manufacturing facilities because we ram the cost of energy up, and energy, cost of oil and energy at manufacturing plants is one of the major costs of running a manufacturing plant. That goes through the roof too fast, they might close down. Okay, so there's it's really hard, and these people could do it openly. Imagine if you had to do that clandestinely without paper trails and all the sorts of things that would happen that you would have to do if you were trying to do that against the law. So one candidate one candidate would be, well, how do you just act like a monopoly? A monopolist makes the most money out of this industry for many reasons. The most price fixing, you just know that the price that they end up with is going to have to be lower than or equal to the monopoly. In the history of these cases in the United States, when the dust settles and you look at all the depositions, most of them don't go all the way to monopoly because they think that it will send too much of an alert and might actually attract entry, and all sorts of things could go wrong, so they'll just try to go part of the way there. We just say they have to have some, there's going to be some price. We're not sure where it is, but it's going to be higher. Now we go to task 2. Task 2 gets a little bit harder. So the only way we can get price up is if we get quantity down. Okay, so our new P star sub fix, which is greater than the competitive price, means we must have the output in the industry for our fix to be less than the output that we saw in the competitive case. You've got to restrict output if you're going to drive up price. It's the only way to have it happen. Now, we know how they did it. They put this embargo on. They stopped putting lots of tankers down the Gulf. That reduced output and drove up price. But in order to make this happen, you have to somehow tell everybody in the game, you're all going to have to share in this task. And so they devise task number 2 is that you have to devise some quota mechanism. In other words, you have to determine who gets to produce how much. That's another hard problem. Okay? Now, in the case of OPEC, some of the large producers like the Saudis, they took it on the chin on purpose. They said, well, we're making 15 million barrels a day, we can go down to 8. Okay? That was a pretty big cut. Some of the smaller producers who were only making 400,000 barrels a day said, well, I can't really cut down that much because I kind of exist on this oil. Okay? And so they had these negotiations. They were hard. People yelled at each other. People broke things. They did, and sometimes they're even videotaped. But they eventually came up with a solution where they found some quota that was the optimal amount for each of the firms. So we'll call Q sub I under the fix. So each country had their own quota, and the sum of those quotas equaled that cap Q that they needed to get that higher price. They understood where they wanted to go. They wanted to go somewhere down here. And the only way they could get back there was if they cut this back. So everybody had to take part in it. And they devised a hard-fought scheme to get that to go. All right. Now we have to go back to this issue and think about how this works. This is task 3, our final task. Suppose it works. Suppose you get this system in place. You got this Q star sub fix, and you have done a marvelous job of driving price up. Price in the industry went up rapidly to $20 a barrel very quickly, which was a cool thing if you were an oil producer. Didn't take very long before it even got up to $40 a barrel. But look what's happening at the individual firms level. Now, these firms who used to be producing the competitive level, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, have now been told, no, you're going to produce this amount. This is your fixed quota. Under the fix, this is what you're going to produce. Well, each of them produce less, and we know what happens because of the marginal cost curve. When you produce less, your marginal cost falls. But on the other hand, look at this price they were getting. Suppose that's $3 and suppose that's $20. What that means is that on the margin, for the last barrel of oil you produced, under the fix, you've got a return out here that's approximately $20 a barrel, and costs look like about half of what they used to be, $1.50. And you're sitting there thinking, you know what? If I could just sneak out maybe an extra 100 barrels a day, an extra 100 barrels, nobody's going to notice. What the heck is that? And $18.50 for 100 barrels. Better yet, maybe 1,000 barrels. Come on. My quota was 300,000. I put an extra 1,000 out. Who knows? An extra 1,000 out at $18.50 a pop. Well, we're talking real money now. That's every day. $54,000, $55,000 extra every day. The end of the week, Oh, that's quite a few cars or whatever it is that I want to spend it on. This gap right here has a famous name to economists. This vertical gap is known as the incentive to cheat. The incentive to cheat exists for everybody. Every single one of these firms who has restricted artificially their output down knows one thing for certain. They're making more money than they were before. What a sweet world they are in with this price. As you can see, this price up here, they're making just a lot of money. But on the other hand, they know a way to make more. If they could just push a few more units out every night, maybe a few midnight runs of an oil tanker down the Gulf, who knows how much is in there? The only way this cartel can hold up is to solve task number 3. And task number 3 is you need to build a policing mechanism. To make this cartel work, you have to have a policing mechanism which allows you to detect cheaters, that is, people who are not honoring their quota, and then you have to be able to deter them. And that deterrence has got to be credible. That's a very important part. When OPEC started, the sort of threat was, if you didn't stick to your quota, we're all just going to go back to the way we were before. Well, a lot of the people who were small cheaters, their quota's 400,000 barrels. They want to put an extra 100,000 out, an extra 100,000. And because of that extra 100,000, the Saudis are going to put 8 million more, because the Saudis are going from 16 million barrels a day to 8 million barrels a day, and they're going to put that 8 million back in the market? I don't think so. These people said it's just not credible. They're going to kill the goose and lay the golden egg. Look how much money they're making with that. I may have put a ding in that price by putting out an extra 100,000 barrels today, okay, compared to what my quota was supposed to be. So you can build mechanisms to find cheaters, but you also have to put credible response functions in. Response functions that the rest of the people say, if they catch me, I can believe that they're going to have something that's going to be painful and cause me some suffering. Okay, these solutions are hard to do, and I tell you this not just because it's an interesting story about what happened to OPEC. It's that these people who are running OPEC could do this openly and in public. They could write things down on paper. They could talk about it, and they could, if you're trying to do this in the United States, outcomes. Everything has to be basically off record.